Welcome to Oil Painting Question and Answers, episode number 17. Before we get into the question, I just wanted to tell you guys that we had slowed down on our videos being released because I've been extremely busy with holiday sales for Geneva Fine Art Supplies. But we're going to be on a more regular filming schedule now, and in fact we'll have a new Q&A episode coming out next week. And in addition to that, some more videos will follow shortly thereafter. So let's get into the questions. The first question relates to something that I wanted to discuss with you. You often speak of high realism with reference to a very painterly abstract approach. Do you think the looseness surrounding the focal point is a learned attribute? Should a painter seeking to be better first learn to paint without abstraction and then break away from the direct copies of reality to master abstraction? Well, first of all, I just released a painting demonstration called Maintaining the Abstraction. It's 40 minutes long, and it gets into this very subject in great detail. You can watch me paint in the background and this dried grass, even the tablecloth, and I talk about how abstraction is in every bit of that. But to answer your question, abstraction is something that you can do from the very beginning when you first start to paint. But it may be, we may have a slightly different definition of abstraction, but what I mean is that when every single time you stroke your brush, even from the very beginning, I mean, I have students that will naturally just kind of make a mess on their canvas, and in that mess there's a lot of abstraction. And what I mean is that from across the room it might look like a perfect realism, just absolute high super realism. But when you get up close and you look at the brushwork and you look at the swirls of the paint, there's this sort of abstract quality to the surface of it. It's not as if somebody went in and just filled in the blanks and left all that, without any mess in it. And I think that there's a natural quality to the world around us. I mean, so in other words, painting high realism requires that you put a little abstraction in the surface, whether it's skin that has all the irregularities and the color and the bumps and the hairs and the freckles and everything else. There's just everywhere you look, even in a surface. I mean, unless it's like a freshly painted sheetrock wall, white wall or something, and even there you get colors that kind of shift depending on how the lights come to the window. So when I say abstraction, what I mean is to not have a sort of very regular fill-in-the-blanks quality to your work, but more of a jumble to your stroke. And that's actually represents reality more than a very clean look. So I hope that answers your question. Certainly there are certain subject matter that you wouldn't paint with any abstraction at all, and like just an absolutely clean painted sheetrock wall behind somebody's head where there's a real smooth, where it really is just a solid, gradation of color without any kind of jumble to it. But even there, there's just a hint of that, abstraction, and that's kind of what gives it the surface quality. Where it stops looking as much like, you've just pulled out a brush and you're painting a piece of furniture or something. Which solvent would you recommend to rework an area that is dry without damaging the canvas? Okay, and I think what you're talking about is if, let's say, you've painted an area and the paint is dried and you want to blend into it, so you're saying to take some solvent and then sort of dissolve that dry paint and make it wet again, so to speak. And that way you can blend the color into it. And I would absolutely not recommend doing that. I would never do that. Once paint has dried and it's formed that paint film, if you go in and break it down with solvent, that paint's not coming back together and forming those bonds like it did the first time. It's just not good for the long-term longevity of the paint film. And it can present all kinds of problems down the road. And the other thing is that it might actually hurt the canvas itself, where that solvent is going through the paint and into the raw canvas. So I would just not recommend that you do it. I have noticed that getting a nice consistency with Terre Verte by Winsor Newton is quite tricky. I notice it doesn't hold its body the same as most of the other colors do, when adding medium, and it becomes very transparent the moment even the slightest bit of medium is added. What are your thoughts on this issue with certain colors? The easiest solution to that is just to mix it yourself with other colors. For instance, you could use the Geneva Artist Oil color and just match some of the Winsor Newton with that, and then it would have all the wonderful handling properties of the Geneva paint. It would retain it wouldn't be transparent, it would flow under the brush exactly like all the other colors do. So if it's the color that you're interested in, just mix that color with other colors. And you could do it with another brand other than Geneva, but that's just, the Geneva paint's already got the medium in it and it already handles wonderfully. So that would be the simplest solution. Your method teaches the use of a proportional divider to transfer the image to the canvas. Other methods include the use of grids, projectors, and optical devices like a camera obscura. What are your thoughts about using optical devices or projection to transfer images? Is it cheating if you employ such methods? Well, I certainly don't think it's cheating. I don't really buy into that part of it. I think that you can do whatever you want. Cheating would be more something like telling somebody that you painted a painting when somebody else really did. I guess that would be cheating. But as far as what method you use to paint and finish and get a finished piece of art, if it's a beautiful painting, then that's good enough for me. I don't really care how it was produced or painted. But as far as using a projector, one of the things that you should be aware of is it won't teach you to draw better. It really, maybe it will on some level, but not in a real, if you use the proportion divider, it really will teach you to draw, because it's teaching you all the things that are important. It's teaching you to see proportion, how wide is the vase compared to the height. It's teaching you to see angles of lines, and so it's a way of checking yourself as you learn to draw. And the more you use a proportional divider, it actually teaches you to draw better, and you can eventually just set it aside and draw freehand. And this is for somebody that has no drawing ability whatsoever. I've seen many people who've taken a proportional divider and it's taught them to draw if they've put it into practice and they've done 10 paintings or whatever. But the projector is certainly a time saver, and if somebody's got a bunch of paintings and they're really just trying to get an exact duplicate of whatever they're looking at, and they want to get their lines perfect, a projector will do the job most of the time. But there are some things that you need to be aware of and ways that it can distort, especially if you're doing large paintings. But certainly it's not cheating, at least not in my book. How do I learn more about painting backgrounds? I'm pleased with the realism I'm achieving in my still life paintings thanks to Draw Mix paint, but I can ruin it all with a poorly chosen or poorly painted background. As far as what background you decide to paint, that's absolutely a matter of personal taste, and I really can't comment on that specifically. But what I will say, I might like, blue and you might like red. It's really a matter of personal taste. But what I will say is that when you set up a still life, and whatever background behind it, the color is really critical, because if you take a still life and you set it up with a green background, a greenish cloth, or even a drab green cloth behind the still life, and then you change that to, say, a maroon or reddish cloth because you decide you want to use red instead, then all the shadow colors on all the objects and in the table will look completely wrong, and it'll look like everything's been pasted onto the background, like you've cut it out of a photo and just stuck it onto something. And the reason for that is because every one of those shadows in the vase and in the table and everywhere is 100% defined by that reflective light going in and filling those shadows up. I've got a video that talks about this and understanding shadows that you might want to check out. But basically, you don't want to mess with that. You don't want to go in and change one color for another, because then you'd have to go back and change all the shadow colors and make them work. So now certainly you can do that as an experienced artist. You can play, and if you change the background, you can go in and put some color into the shadows so that it all works if you know what you're doing. But if you're starting off and you want to paint something, decide at the beginning what the background should be, and then just paint it that way. And that's what I would recommend if you're still learning. If you're kind of want to go off in your own direction and do your own thing, then you need to learn to make your shadow colors match your background color. And that's something you learn through experience. By doing a lot of color mixing, you start to kind of get it. And I've changed backgrounds before myself, but I had to go back and change all the shadow colors to match the background. As a left-hander, I've occasionally blocked in using my right hand, finding it usually looser and yet often more accurate than left-hand blocking. Have you ever tried painting left-handed? No, I never really have, not that I can remember. But one thing, it kind of makes sense. I imagine if I tried to, because when you're stroking and you're using your right hand, the hand you know how to do, you tend to sort of know, there's no wiggle, everything is deliberate and you're doing exactly what you think. And if you're using your opposite hand, like you mentioned, then I could see how you might not be able to keep your line straight and you get a little bit more of an abstract shape, and you get a little bit more of an abstract feel to it. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to try it out. You talk about taking a bunch of junk and just putting it in the shadow box at random. After moving and removing, you arrive at a grouping that you like. It still looks like a collection of things on a shelf in the ultimate hoarder's house, though. What are your thoughts on starting with things that have some relationship to one another and arranging them in a way that is pleasing? Absolutely. There's no right way, to go about setting up something. Certainly there are, great artists, I'm positive, that deliberately set things up in a pleasing way, as you mentioned. For me, it's just a matter of, personal taste in what I like. The painting that I ended up painting, if it looks like the ultimate hoarder's shelf to you, then that's absolutely valid. And I think that's the beauty of the world. Different people have different tastes, and I might like that. And and that's actually something that I've seen before. On our online forum, somebody will post a painting, and there'll be a difference of opinion about the subject. And I tend to like paintings that have a lot of clutter in them, and other people are really put off by the clutter. So it's absolutely a matter of personal taste, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. Why is it called Geneva Artist Oil Color? There's a very simple answer to that. About a month after, or maybe it was about 6 weeks after my youngest daughter, Geneva, was born, we were trying to come up with a name for this company that we're forming. She's now 3 years old. That was over 3 years ago. And so I just named it after my youngest newborn daughter. How do you sign your paintings? Do you add any other info to the back? I don't add any info to the back. That might be a good idea. You're going to want to make absolutely sure that whatever ink, or you could probably just use a regular lead pencil maybe, but you just don't want to use anything on that raw canvas that's going to go in there that might have some acid in it or something that over the long term might cause the canvas to deteriorate a little bit. And certainly not anything that has any oil in it, for sure. So you just need to know that whatever you're putting on there is not going to affect the canvas. I just never do it, but I do sign my paintings. I always sign them, and the way I sign them, if I can, is just with the tip of my brush. I'll just scratch it right into the paint like I'm doing here. But sometimes that doesn't work because the background is so close to the stain color that if you scratch it into the paint, you can't see it. And so I have to pull out a very small detail brush and paint it in. And it takes a little more time. Sometimes I have difficulty getting in the zone when starting artwork. Do you have any warm-ups that you do before you start painting? No, I don't. Not that I can think of. You know, I do have a hard time, painting when I'm really, really not in the mood to do it. And what I discovered was it's really important to take breaks often, to maybe only paint for 30 or 45 minutes if that's all that you can do, and maintain your focus. Because the moment you start drifting, and you lose your focus and you're daydreaming or whatever because you've been working at something for 3 hours straight and you haven't taken a break, that's when the quality of your work can suffer. But beyond that, in terms of getting in the zone where you're painting well or not painting well, it wasn't until about 5 years ago or maybe 10 years ago that I realized that there were days where I really didn't paint as well. And everything seemed to be took a lot more effort than other days. And then there's other days I wake up and I'll look at something and it's obvious how to paint it, and I just pick up a brush and I paint it and it looks good the first time. And then other days I just struggle and can't ever seem to sort of get going. So I think it's just a natural, rhythm in your the way that, at least for me, I don't know any way to sort of get out of it. So I guess I don't really have an answer to your question, but I think that the best thing you can always do is, even if you're not in the zone, and I used to have to paint, it didn't matter. I had deadlines after deadlines with my portraits, and so even if I wasn't in the mood, I still had to paint. And when I did paint when I'm not in the mood, some of those times is when you learn the most, because you're kind of struggling and you work through it, and whether it's color mixing or drawing or whatever it is, and in working through that, you really learn the most sometimes when you're struggling. And that might sound counterintuitive, but that's, I think, the case, at least for me. I've been using Winsor Newton for several years, and I like to paint, except that when the painting is completed and allowed to dry for several weeks, I can see very shiny areas and very dull areas. Would this also happen with Geneva paints? Also, can you mix Geneva paint with Winsor Newton paint on the same canvas, and can you blend the two different products together? You can absolutely mix them together completely. There's no problem with using Geneva paint with any other brand of oil paint. It's just oil paint. Now, as far as the sunken in areas and the glossy areas, when the Winsor Newton paint dries, the same thing will happen with Geneva paint. In fact, I think it'll happen with all the major brands of oil paint. That's a normal process of the paint drying. Some pigments become flat, more flat than others. Some retain some glossiness to them, so you get this sort of patchiness to it. It's very normal, and you shouldn't worry about it at all. There's two things that you do to deal with that. Once the paint dries, if you're going to work on your painting more, that means you're not finished with it and you've still got some more work to do on it. Then what you do to get rid of the sunken in areas is oil out your painting. And I've got a video that explains exactly how to do that, so go watch that video. It's called How to Oil Out Your Painting. Now, the next thing is if your painting is finished, and it's completely finished, and you're not going to work on it anymore, then you need to set it aside and let it dry for a couple months. And then after it's dry, it's going to have all these sunken in areas because it's been drying, and then it's time to varnish it. And that's why all oil paintings need a varnish. There's several reasons. One, it protects the paint so that later on, even 100 years, 200 years from now, they can remove the varnish and all the dirt and dust that's collected into it, put on a fresh coat of clear varnish, and it's like the painting's fresh and brand new. And the colors look just as fresh as they did when they were painted. And that's not going to happen if you don't varnish a painting, because dirt's going to settle into the paint and it's going to get into the paint film itself. That's the big reason you want to varnish. But then the other reason is because it'll put a nice consistent gloss, and I recommend glossy varnish. I've got a video why I recommend glossy varnish over matte varnishes, so go watch that one. But basically, I put on a glossy varnish, and that will make everything look like it's fresh painted again, and all the sunken areas will have disappeared. Do you usually work in a completely black studio? The black definitely makes you and your subject matter stand out very nicely in the videos, but I'm having trouble imagining a completely black studio for myself. To me, light and art go nicely together, and I think I would be happier in a bright, cheery studio. At the same time, I fully understand the need to eliminate all sources of light that can cause glare on the canvas. I'm glad you asked that question. A lot of people get the impression that I think everybody should be painting in a black studio, and that might be because I happen to paint in a very dark studio. As you say, it's not only better for filming, but back when we had workshops with 10 people in here, where one person could be causing glare on another person, and we just had it all dark just because it made it simpler. But the only thing that needs to be dark is that you can just put a curtain behind you. It's behind you where all the glare on your painting comes from. Okay, now when I say behind you, I mean here, or if you're wearing a white shirt, which is right here also, here's your painting, and everything here behind me, here, or white, if you have white hair and it's getting lit, that's going to reflect, but it's all here. On the sides, left, right, you get absolutely zero glare on your painting. You could have the brightest window in the world and you will get zero glare on your painting if it's off to one side or the other. Even off to the side and behind you is fine. It just can't be directly behind you because that's where it bounces back into your eye. Now, there's one other place that you have to deal with glare, and that is, or two other places I should say. If you're working from life and you're using a color checker, and you hold out your color checker, you can get some glare on the paint on your color checker. So that means if you're holding your color checker out, straight in front of you and up is where the glare comes from. So a high window right above or a big bright light or something up there is going to put glare on your color checker. So just make sure you're not getting glare from that spot. Now the other place is your palette. If you've got your palette and there's a light right on the other side of your palette, it's going to, above and on the other side, it's going to bounce just like a ball. The light's going to come down, bounce on your palette and into your eye. So on the other side of your palette and up is the other place where you don't want to have a bright light, okay? But other than that, you can have all the bright windows or whatever that you want. You wouldn't want a really bright window right behind your painting where you're looking at your painting and there's a big window behind it, that you're having to stare at. But other than that, it's really not, you don't have to have a dark studio. But let me tell you one thing, and I don't know how true this might be for you, but I think that the real crux of that sort of I don't want to be in a black box thing, if you just have a window, just a sliver of a window somewhere in your studio where you can look outside and see that it's a sunny day or whatever it is, it ties you to the outside world and you don't feel like you're in this isolated, cocoon hiding. One of the things that used to throw me, because I have had studios that did not have a window to the outside world. And when you can't see what time it is outside and you walk outside and you think it's daytime and all of a sudden it's already dark, it kind of throws you, and I think it might, interfere with your body clock or whatever. So it's probably a good idea to have just a single window where you can see a sliver of sunlight or, see the outside world, even if it's got a drape over it, and it's, because sometimes a big, bright, sunny window is too much. So just hang a, transparent cloth across the window or whatever. But anyway, that's just what I think about it. But you definitely don't have to be painting in a completely black studio. You don't have to have a black roof. Your floor doesn't have to be black. You wouldn't want a big bright white rug, on your floor, only because if you're standing up and looking down at your painting, you might see a little glare from the carpet bouncing up into your eye. But not if you're sitting at your studio, because then the carpet's down here and the light would have to bounce like this and you wouldn't see the glare. So I hope that answers your question about dark studios. It is easy to copy life itself on a canvas after years and years of practice, but how does one see value in proper colors when copying from their imagination? Should you know how light works with every shape and color? Is it like a formula each time you paint from your imagination? Personally for me, there's a limit to what I can do from my imagination. In fact, I don't know that there's anybody in the world, maybe there is, but I don't think there's anybody in the world that can paint, photo real and do a face, they all, the people that paint at that super extreme high level of realism are always working from a photograph, or maybe from life, but they're not just doing it out of their head. But what there are certain things that you learn. I can paint a landscape out of my head. This landscape and this landscape here were both painted out of my head. I didn't have a source that I was using to figure out what the colors were doing or the shadows were doing. And a landscape's a lot easier because I do know about shadows. I do know about how light plays. But I learned all that stuff from, as you say, copying life, and from doing so many portraits over the years and backgrounds and everything else, that you begin to develop an instinct for it. And it's something that I can't explain. It's certainly not a formula. It's just a feeling. It's hard to explain. It's like riding a bike or something. You can't really explain how you do it. But you start to get this weird, if I'm going to paint an apple, I just paint the right shadow color. If I was going to, make up an apple, which I could probably do decently well, and put it on a tablecloth, I would probably get the colors really close. It's just a feeling that I had, and after so many years, you start to get an instinct for it. There's some other things that artists do, and that I could imagine doing myself if I was to do some work. For instance, I saw the other day a painting, and I don't remember where I saw it, but it was, maybe a week ago, and somebody had done some dinosaurs or something that were in the woods, and obviously they had made it up. But I could imagine that what they did was they used photographs to figure all their colors out. I would do it that way. I would get an elephant or a photograph of an elephant in the woods, and I would get all my colors from that, and then I would paint a dinosaur using the colors that I mixed the elephant for. Or that I mix for the elephant. And so there's a lot of little tricks like that you can do, but in the end it's just a combination of things. And I think that if you do paint realism and you take the time, and paint for 3 or 4 years and really learn to do it well, and that's a real challenge. But if you do get to that point, you will automatically begin to develop an instinct to paint out of your imagination. And if I did a face, and I haven't tried one, maybe I should, but I think I could do pretty good. But it wouldn't be like when I'm working from a photograph or working from life. When you are painting, how do you know when you are done? That's a really tough question. I don't know that there's a good answer to that. If you're painting realism and you're trying to paint a ketchup bottle on a table, then you can decide that your reflection is off, or you can check your values and decide that you need to work more on the front edge of the tablecloth because, when you check your colors, the color's wrong, or if you see a line it's wrong. So you can always analyze your painting in that way if you're trying to achieve this, high realism. But as far as whether you're done when you're doing something where you're still, maybe trying to decide to change things for composition, or in my case, I just painted a painting where I tried to demonstrate how to paint an abstraction, and I painted a background, and in that background, I decided, I guess 2 or 3 times, that I was done with the background and kept working on it. And, to make that decision, there's not a right answer to that, because, even in that painting, I painted it, the background, I think I decided that in the end, maybe I did like the way it ended up being, but there were 2 or 3 other times when I could have stopped, and a lot of people would have said, might say that it looked better. So there really isn't an answer. But in terms of painting realism or checking yourself, you can always go back and take a finished painting and decide, are my values right in the shadow there? And if you still have your source in front of you, or if you're working from a photograph and you still have it, you can go in and check your color, and then just get a toothpick and just put a little teeny bit of that color into your paint and see if your value is right or not. And if your value is wrong, then you've got to fix that, because it almost never looks good to have your values off. If your colors are off, sometimes they can even be more pleasing than the source. But in general, when painting realism, always go back and reevaluate your values. So you can always do that. And if everything checks out and you don't see any glaring problems, then you're done. But beyond that, trying to decide whether you really like something or whether you should change it or not, that's a matter of taste, and there really isn't a good answer to that. It's just one of those things. If you want to find links to all my videos, go to drawmixpaint.com. If you want to find out about the paint that I use, go to genevafineart.com. And thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments section of this video, and I'll get to as many of those questions as I can in next week's episode.